Hey Emma,
Yes, Madeline.
what's about 1/4 the length of this podcast?
I don't know. What is it?
12 minutes! Hello, and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your traumatic host, Madeline.
I'm your small host, Emma.
And thanks for tuning into this week's show. See, it's a joke because the podcast runs more like an hour these days.
Yeah.
So if I just said what's about 1/5 the length of the podcast, it just would have been a statement. But this is a joke, because
it's never at like
inaccurate.
50 minutes anymore. Yeah. Got
Yeah.
it.
Get it?
Very funny. Yes.
Thanks.
Editor Emma is laughing her head off about this.
Yeah, I'm sure she loves that. I'm sure she loves how much I have to say. This week, folks, we've got the just really dark doubleheader.
Yeah.
Really lovely. Happy spring, everyone. Doubleheader.
Yeah.
Of American Mcgee's Alice and 12 minutes. So, buckle up. Content warning.
Yeah.
Abuse and violence. And I feel like I still have to protect the twist of 12. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And other content warnings that you might look up if you are considering playing 12 minutes.
Yes. Also, Alice for questionable depictions of mental illness.
Just a lot of content warnings on it. I'm not looking forward to the mashup because the mashup is going to be like, what questionable, take on abuse, or
We'll really think about the mashup, right?
Yeah.
Let's not go as ad hoc as usual. We'll take some time and try to
be a
think
little more
it.
thoughtful.
Yeah.
Oh, well, first up this week's games is American Mcgee's Alice. American Mcgee is a real person.
Yes, he is the designer.
Which I recognize is embarrassing for me because obviously he worked on a lot of influential games, the Doom series and Quake, and is like a semi-well-known designer. But I guess I'm dating myself as someone who has never played Doom or Quake. But I was like, oh, this is just a funny title for a game. American Mcgee, that's not a real name. But it is his real name, and it's not just a real person, it's a real person's real name.
Yeah.
Not that it's not your real name if you change it or you pick it later, but that really is a name that someone gave to their child.
Yes. I knew he was a person. I didn't really know what he had worked on before looking into it. So,
for what it's worth, the title is American Mcgee's Alice because EA thought it was going to be easier to trademark.
Yes.
Which makes it a little bit less, I don't know.
He's actually said that he was kind of uncomfortable with them going with that because he felt like it sidelined everybody else who worked on the game.
Look, if
but
anybody
it was
else...
exclusively EA being like, we can't trademark Alice.
If anybody else working on the game had a name as fun as he did, they could have had their name on the box.
It was. It was
didn't.
just how fun the name was. That's how they made their decision.
It seems that way. They would not have done, Joe Brown's Alice.
Maybe they would have. I don't know.
I don't think they would have. I think they were like, you've got a fun name. You got a name that's fun in a dark kind of fun name that goes along with Alice in Wonderland. Not that Alice is American. Anyway, I thought it was just a stylized weird thing, but I've spent enough time talking about this. American Mcgee's Alice is a 2000 third-person action-adventure game from Rogue Entertainment, published by EA, originally for computers, eventually ported to PS3 and Xbox 360. There was a rumored PlayStation 2 port that was supposed to come out more contemporaneously that I think basically just killed Rogue Entertainment. That's sort of what I read and never came out.
Mm-hmm.
But as you might guess from the title, it's crazy, right? How, like, some certain fictional first names, it's like you just hear Alice, and, like, of course it's going to be Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
But American McGee's Alice is a dark, very dark, like, really dark take on Alice in Wonderland. Or I guess I'll say, like, American McGee's Alice is a quite dark, but in many ways just in that sort of, like, early 2000s of, like, fairy tales, but dark kind of
I mean,
thing.
it reminds me, I mean, it came out before the movie version, right? But
Yeah.
it was Tim Burton, right? Tim
Yes, it
Burton
was.
did the Alice in Wonderland movie.
I don't know that I've ever seen that one. I don't know what the backstory
Well, it's sort
behind
of gothic
Wonderland is.
aesthetically, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Aesthetically, it's got that, but there's a dark underpinning to the Wonderland situation that I don't know if is part of that. I haven't seen the Tim Burton one.
But it is, I mean, the Tim Burton one is definitely probably more family friendly than this. But I would just say it's not like it's like a gory thing.
Right.
It's just sort of a horror type take on it.
Yeah. And I would say American McGee's Alice, yeah, is dark. It's psychological horror underpinnings that we'll talk about. The sequel, I don't know if you read about the sequel.
Only
The
a little.
sequel goes into some bizarre territory. To me, just like unnecessary territory, but we'll get there. So in American McGee's Alice, the events of Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, I think, have happened. Although they're not referenced in the game, and despite the fact that, of course, Alice in Wonderland is in the public domain, and that's why we can get games like this. How long until we get the Great Gatsby games, by the way? Those coming, do we think?
They should, I think.
Murder, the green light. You're stuck in a loop trying to... boats against the tide, borne ceaselessly into the past, unless you can break the loop.
Yeah.
Honestly, a Great Gatsby, Great Gatsby is already dark, but like a Great Gatsby video game might be a weirdly good mashup of these two games. Anyway, in this version of Alice in Wonderland, as I've tried to say like 3 times and then distracted myself, Alice's family, she's having one of her Wonderland dreams, but she wakes up and there's a fire in her home and her whole family dies. And so she gets taken to a psychiatric facility, and she's in like a sort of a coma state for several years until she is able to retreat to Wonderland. That's all effed up now, and if she can fix it, she's going to be able to restore her mental health.
Specifically, like, the staff give her, like, a bunny, her stuffed bunny that survived the fire, and then the bunny begins talking to her, and she ends up back in Wonderland.
But, you know, that ends up being a good thing for her mental health in the end.
Well, it's about facing your demons.
Right.
Right? So she goes into basically what is like her mind palace called Wonderland, I guess, and confronts the things that are troubling her, is the metaphor going on here.
I hadn't quite put together that that's another shared thread between these two games this week. More on that later. I hadn't put together that both of these games are ultimately probably Mind Palace games. That's probably a light spoiler, but oh well.
I think the way the sequels go, Wonderland becomes less of a mind palace than it is in the first one, and more of an actual, like, environmental thing that can be affected by other people other than just Alice. But the first one's very much a straightforward, like, fight your inner demons narrative.
So in this first one, right, she learns that the Queen of Hearts has sort of messed up all of Wonderland, and the White Rabbit thinks she's going to be able to fix it. And she eventually finds that she can fix everything if she kills the Queen of Hearts. She's got to kill the Jabberwock first, and like do a lot of other things. The Mad Hatter is doing horrible experiments on his rodent Tea Party pals, right? Like, there's all sorts of, you know, lightly gothic, messed up stuff going on in Wonderland.
The Mad Hatter flattens the White Rabbit.
Of course.
With his foot.
Because
they're small at the time.
Right. Drink me.
It's not very gory. It really just looks like the White Rabbit, like, just sort of goes 2D.
It's Wonderland. It makes sense. If a gory
Yeah.
take on Wonderland would just be bad, I think. It would just be bad. So in the game, right, you control Alice along a pretty linear route, which is one of the major critiques I think this game got, that it's quite linear in its progression. And so as you go, you fight enemies and bosses with toys, right, weapons that are, I think that they're like very much, they look sort of like normal everyday implements, but they've been turned into weapons. And you are platforming and solving puzzles, and your health bar is sanity, your magic is willpower, like it's that kind of situation.
Yeah. It was released during the time when sanity bars didn't automatically make people roll their eyes.
Yeah.
As they should.
Look, I get the point of it with this game, but also, yeah.
It's not the bar itself, right? It's just like, maybe we should call it something else.
Yeah. Apparently I read that American, Mr. Mcgee, was a little tired of Space Marines, and that's why he wanted to work on something like Alice in Wonderland, because he'd spent a lot of time with Space Marines.
Yes, I think he talked at the time about, like, he thought it was a shame that with all of, like, the technology that goes into games, that all of the focus was on, like, creating real places, you know, when he thought there was a lot of room to create things that were more fantastical in nature. Which, I mean, I think you get more fantastical settings, but you could apply the same argument today to our obsession with, like, photorealism, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. Apparently also, like, he considered a lot of different dark takes on Alice here. One of which I'll just share because I feel like, once again, there's a little bit of overlap. Involved a modern-day Alice murdering her abusive stepfather in reality while journeying through Wonderland. Which EA said, no thanks to that, apparently. Despite that, it still ended up being EA's first M-rated game, which is sort of crazy. And apparently that was something that, Mr. Mcgee, keep calling him Mr. Mcgee? Saying the full name American Mcgee.
You can probably drop the Mr., I think. You can just say Mcgee.
I don't love that, though, either. Anyway, it's something that he apparently wanted because the game came out in December of 2000, and so basically he was like, I really don't want anyone getting this as a Christmas present for their kid.
I feel like that is an optimistic take on, like, parents paying attention to the M rating on the on the
he
cover,
later
though.
said he regretted it. He was like, I actually don't think it deserved an M rating, but seemingly was advocated for, which I think is a little bit opposite of the way things often go. Anyway, spoilers for a 22-year-old game, but in the end of the game, Alice does manage to kill the Queen of Hearts, who, in a not that creative, whatever, right? Like, this is just how it goes. Like, this is how I expect a Mind Palace story to end, always, right? But the Queen of Hearts was maybe sort of Alice all along, right?
Well, yeah.
And so kill the Queen of Hearts, all the characters that died come back, and Alice is mentally healed and able to leave the asylum.
Honestly, it feels like an unrealistic picture of an asylum in London in, like, the 1800s. Like, I guess I don't know exactly the history of stuff, but it does feel like they would have just, done this. They weren't great.
Yeah. On one hand, yes. On the other hand, you wonder, at what point was it like, well, we need a bed, so turn someone out?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, though. They just let her sleep there for, like, 10 years or whatever. Like, that doesn't feel realistic to me.
Don't think about it too hard, Emma. It's a fantasy game. I think it's an unexpectedly optimistic ending for this game. I was a little surprised, given the whole dark pastiche of it all, that in the end, it's like, nope, she defeats her demons and she gets to leave.
Yeah, it's nice.
It is. It was sort of it was a pleasant surprise. I thought at the end there was still going to be trauma. And look, the trauma comes back in the sequel. But for a game that stood on its own for like a decade, I was like, oh, what an oddly hopeful, unrealistic in its hopefulness. What an oddly hopeful way for this game to go.
I mean, ultimately what it is it's just like a really bad case of survivor's guilt, right? Which, I mean, you cannot go into your mind palace and defeat your demons with your Vorpal blade to get over that. And
maybe
if you're,
you can.
If you're,
have we considered that? Have psychiatrists considered the Vorpal blade technique?
And in the 1800s, you probably weren't getting, like, actual help. But it's totally, it's totally possible to be able to continue on with your life healthily, even while struggling with that. So I think it's realistic.
I guess I just mean that most people don't have a mind palace hallucination and awake from their hallucination and they're fine.
Sure.
That's what I mean.
Sure.
But then, the Alice series since then has been on sort of a tumultuous journey, I think. It's one of those series where it's like, there's just things that are promised and things that are promised and things that are hyped up, and then not a lot of them actually happen. It's kind of the vibe that I got. But the next thing that comes out, so there was a movie adaptation that kicked around for like a long time, right?
There's a TV series adaptation in the works now.
I saw that just got announced. I never know what that means with games. I feel like I hear about game TV series, things that get announced all the time, and like, where are they?
I feel like games news sites like jump on that news. Like, I feel like if you looked into like all TV shows and movies that were like kicking around, you'd find a lot of them that are in development hell or just never get made or never get started. Yeah. But we hear about video game ones a lot because video game news covers them, right?
Yeah.
So it feels like a disproportionate number of video game movies never get made.
That's fair.
This one has David Hayter on it, I guess.
I think somebody was just like, Alice in Borderland did well for Netflix.
Yeah. That one's more of a straightforward death game, I think.
I know, but do you think they were like, Alice is kind of hot right now?
People love Alice right now. Maybe.
So the next thing that actually came out was a sequel in 2011 called Alice Madness Returns. I guess I should say the first game sold quite well, was quite well reviewed, became something of a cult classic. And then we have Alice Madness Returns, which it released for, I think, PS3 and Xbox 360, and it came with a free download of the first game, which, like, can you imagine anyone doing that now?
I mean, no. It was 10 years old when it came out, and I guess we weren't quite as deep into re-release, remake culture as we are now. But no, I really can't imagine that.
Well, it did. In reading about the sequel, it has some... Correct me, did you read about the plot of the sequel?
Yeah, a little.
Again, no spoilers for an 11-year-old game that... It sounds like he's been crowdfunding or Patreoning a threequel for a long time.
He has a Patreon where he's working on several games right now. Like 3 or 4 games.
Yeah. But there is supposedly a third Alice game in pre-development. So maybe there'll be another one that comes eventually. But in the sequel, Alice is now living in an orphanage, and she's like doing okay, but she's starting to have hallucinations again. And it turns out the doctor who's running the orphanage, you eventually find out that he is the one who set fire to her family's house because he sexually assaulted her sister and he didn't want anyone to know. But also because he starts the fire because he has this business basically of brainwashing orphans so they can be sold to like abusers. But I was like, oh my god, like, this is incredibly dark. I don't know if I want my game to be about this.
I did not do enough research into the sequel, and I don't think reading the Wikipedia summary of any plot really helps you understand context, right?
Fair enough.
Because it puts it all out there so, like, directly.
That's fair. That's
that
fair.
I have absolutely no idea how any of this is presented in the sequel, because I only really looked into the presentation of the first one. So I can't really say anything about it.
That's fair. I guess the point that I was making is that, I guess the trust level I would feel about a team that's like, here's edgy Alice in Wonderland being ready to take on, like, child abuse. I'm sure it's handled better than the Wikipedia article makes it seem.
Well, I don't know that either. You don't have to say that either. All we have is, like, a summary.
Fair enough. Well, I was just gonna say that my reaction to it was, I don't know if that draws me to the game. There's also a bunch of short films that got crowdfunded at a certain point. So a whole Alice metaverse.
No.
That's just a joke.
Just a normal franchise.
Just a joke. Oh my god. Just a joke. Yeah, the TV show getting greenlit now is so interesting. This just feels like the kind of story that is dated. I don't know. It just feels like we're doing less of this now. I feel like there was a lot of the, like, it's a retelling of a fairy tale. It's a retelling of a classic story. It's one of the reviews of this mentioned Pride and Prejudice and zombies, and I was like, oh yeah, like, that's a thing, right?
Yeah.
I feel like it's in this very specific time period of take a well-known public domain thing and kind of make it dark, sometimes for laughs and sometimes for dark.
How long ago did Once Upon a Time end?
I don't know when it ended. That's a good question. Let's see.
It's probably longer ago than I think, and I'm about to feel really old when you tell me, but...
No, it ended in 2018.
Yeah, that was still really popular when it was on.
The whole time it was on?
I mean, as popular as, like, non-streaming TV shows get nowadays, I believe.
That's fair. But that started in 2011. So my point is not that those pieces of media don't still exist. I guess it's just that it feels of an entertainment era. I don't know why
We did definitely go through a phase, yes. But I mean,
don't know why I identify this also with the dark Batman films. And of course all Batman films are that way now.
We just released another dark Batman film.
I know, but I
got
think
eyeliner in this one though, so it's modern.
You're right. I guess I just mean, like, I think of this and I think of the like pivot to dark superhero that happened in that, like, mid-aughts as being of a kind.
That's fair.
And so it's interesting to me to see something like this get greenlit now, because it's like, do I really want another dark Alice in Wonderland now?
I mean, there's just the Tim Burton ones.
I guess that's true. Well, maybe if they get James McAvoy and Daisy Ridley to do it.
And Kingdom Hearts, of course. The real dark Alice in Wonderland.
I did think about that as I was reading this. I was like,
when I was a child, Wonderland, the ending of the Wonderland world in Kingdom Hearts did scare me. So
it's basically the same.
She gets swallowed up by the darkness.
Maybe Sora's family did die in a fire. You're right.
The shadows took her. That was scary.
Well, on that note, should we talk about 12 minutes?
Yeah.
So 12 Minutes is an adventure time loop game from Luis Antonio and a small team, published by Annapurna, which I had forgotten makes movies too.
Yes.
And, like, primarily
they started with
movies.
The interactive is just the subset of Annapurna.
Yeah, I had forgotten that. And it came out last August for Windows and Xbox, and in December for everybody else. So, as you may have heard on previous podcasts, I didn't play either of these games this time because maybe I could have managed to find a way to buy American McGee's Alice on the PlayStation 3, but I wasn't willing to go through the 20-step process to buy something on my PlayStation 3.
It is also on Steam, although I don't know if it works on Mac or not.
Yeah, it's unclear, especially since my Mac is now only runs 64-bit, right? So, like, I can't play Portal. Anyway. But I did watch a full all endings playthrough of 12 minutes. Now, well, okay, I'll save my thoughts for a minute. Emma, do you want to tell people about the game?
Sure. So, 12 minutes is like a point-and-click adventure game where you're a man stuck in a time loop. So you come home, and if you go through the first loop correctly, which in having watched a couple people do it, nobody does. So there's that. But if you go through the first loop correctly, you come home, you say hi to your wife's made dessert and has a surprise for you. You set the table, you sit down, you eat your dessert.
When is a dessert not just a dessert?
She gives you a gift, you open it up. You being James McAvoy, she being Daisy Ridley. They don't have names. Are we just going to
call them James and Daisy? Or
they don't have names in the game.
Yeah.
And I personally just think James, Daisy, and Williams. So,
yeah. Is that how you say his name?
What?
Willem Dafoe? Is it William or is it Willem?
Oh, it's Willem. It's Willem
okay.
Dafoe.
Okay, I was like, oh my gosh, is it really pronounced William and it's just spelled Willem?
No, that's just me.
Okay.
She gives you a gift. It has baby's clothes in it, with the name Dahlia on it. And she says that she's pregnant and she wants to name the baby after your mother who died in childbirth. After she tells you this, someone knocks on your door. You open it up, and Willem Dafoe comes in and zip ties both your hands and accuses Daisy of killing her father like 10 years ago or something. And is also looking for her father's pocket watch. She says she doesn't know what he's talking about and also doesn't know where the watch is. And then Willem Dafoe kills you both. And James reawakens, having entered his apartment back in a time loop and has to figure out what's going on and how he can stop the cop from killing him and his wife. That's the basic premise.
I will say, before I get into the messiness around 12 minutes specifically, before I give people the major spoiler warning to dip out if you are unspoiled and still want to play this game, is that this does feel like an interesting direction for the adventure game genre to be evolving in. Right? It did seem like for a while adventure games were more or less dead,
mm-hmm.
right? And with the great arrival of the time loop on the video game scene, that does seem like there's finally a path for them again. And while 12 minutes, there's a lot that we will talk about 12 minutes that is not successful or just not good or messy. I do think there's an interesting gameplay loop here that does sort of work.
I mean, trailers made it look really cool, right? Yeah. People were very excited about it when it was announced. It had this big name voice cast. It was coolly presented. It had like nice suspenseful music, all this sort of thing. So people were very excited for it when it came out. I remember that.
And it's been in development for quite a long time, because it seems like it was originally really a one-man project, and it was only when Annapurna, like, he was more or less ready to release it in 2015 or 2016, and then when a publisher came on board, it was like, oh, okay, this game can be better.
Yes, he showed it at 2015 PAX East, with the gameplay loop done, but with placeholder art. And yeah, wanted to release it in 2016, but ended up, with Annapurna and bringing on a team of 5, apparently. Which also, this included adding, like, the fully voiced lines to the game, which I assume Annapurna helped them get the big names.
Yeah. I can't imagine this game not having a voice cast.
Yeah. It'd be interesting, because it's so timing-based, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that it's impossible, but because the text boxes, you couldn't... I feel like it'd be hard to have it be like you click through text boxes, because that gives you too much time to, like, stop and think, I guess.
Yeah.
And that seems antithetical to the game.
Yeah. It's tricky. I really loved Wikipedia saying, the gameplay loop has been compared to The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Like, come on. Come on.
It is this time loop where you find out more and use that information to solve problems. So,
I just
fair.
It's disingenuous. They're like, you know what game 12 minutes is like? The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Don't
that
do
could
this,
be the
Wikipedia.
mashup. There's like an evil moon in that. That feels very Alice.
Yeah, that's true.
We could just make the mashup Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask.
Is there trauma in The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, though?
I think the people in the village, like, all have, like, problems that Link has to help them with.
They do.
So, that's sort of trauma.
Fair enough. 12 minutes was originally going to be, instead of in a single apartment, in a neighborhood, and instead of 12 minutes, 24 hours. So it's closer to Majora's Mask.
Yeah. But that he ended up ditching that because it was too big of a scale for the team that was working on it, which is probably smart.
I did like reading, again, I'm trying to get all the stuff that's, like, not spoilery out of the way before I dive in. But I did enjoy, there are a few interviews with the celebs working on the game, and it was sort of interesting. One, for them to be taking it as a video game, like, quite seriously, right? And obviously that's because this is a game that's very filmic in a lot of ways,
yeah.
and very Hitchcock inspired and all of that. Very The Shining inspired. But it was interesting to be like, oh, okay, like, no, these people aren't like, oh, a game, how weird. They're taking it very seriously. They're taking it seriously enough they were recording these lines in the middle of the true pandemic, height of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting to read particularly about, like, what James McAvoy's process had to be like on this, because he does deliver more or less the same lines over and over again, but he has to find, like, 30 different ways to do it, which must be tough, especially if you're not necessarily recording in order.
Yeah.
And obviously that's tough in a lot of different video games, but I will say in watching the playthrough, like, I thought the voice acting was pretty good. Like, especially for these being people that aren't, like, voice actors. I thought they did a decent job.
I thought, and this could have just been a directorial choice and, like, a timing-based choice, but they didn't get very distraught, I guess.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's sort of a muted performance, even during, like when he, like, figures out it's a time loop. It's like, oh, okay. Rather than being, upset about it in any particular way.
So that's true. I guess, I imagine that, though, if there were any of those more emotional lines that you had to see every time, like, imagine how someone going, like, "Wah!" would play on, like, the 30th time through.
That's fair.
So I can respect that
I
as a
generally
directorial
have
choice.
mixed feelings about Hollywood actors doing more and more voice acting. But in general, I thought that they did a good job with this. And if there's any project that you'd want to maybe bring Hollywood actors onto, I guess it's something like this.
Yeah. That was my impression, too. I have the similar feelings of, like, well, you should really let the voice actors be voice actors. But I was pleasantly surprised that the people on this game did a decent job, despite that not really being any of their bread and butter. I was sort of annoyed at first because the 3 of them got credited in the credits, and there are 2 other speaking roles, and I was like, where are those people? But then, of course, there were other credits further on.
Yeah.
But I was like, that's lame that only the 3 star actors get credited, and Bumblebee and the 911 operator don't. But then
did they not call the insurance also? in your playthrough?
I don't think they did, but I did see a video where they called the insurance. I watched one where, I don't know if you watched the video that was like 12 minutes explained in 12 minutes.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, I really liked at the end him calling as he was being murdered.
Yeah.
That is what being on hold with customer support feels like.
Yeah.
I also liked him eating dessert as his wife, like, wept over having her secret discovered.
There's a lot of ways you can kind of ruin the seriousness of the events happening. Some of them feel like they're on purpose, and some of them don't. Like, it's very funny, and I really honestly cannot tell if the game, like, intends you to find parts funny, or is just unable to, like, account for all player behavior, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I also don't know how I feel about either way, if that makes the game better or worse.
They do often cite Groundhog Day as an inspiration, which obviously for the time loop, but suggests there is some awareness that there is a potential for humor in a time loop narrative. So take that as you will.
Mm-hmm.
So are we ready to dive into the spoilers part of the game?
Sure. Let's do it.
All right, so if you're still hoping to play 12 minutes, I think it's on Game Pass, so, like,
Yep.
if you're curious about it, it's there. If you're still hoping to play 12 minutes and go in unspoiled, you should probably stop now. The mashup won't be very good, right? Like,
You never know. Maybe we could come up with something brilliant.
Come back once you've played the game. Despite being called 12 minutes, it's probably about a 10-hour game.
Depending how good you are at the puzzles.
Yeah.
Also.
Okay, so my impression after watching the playthrough of just all the endings, right, is I was pleasantly surprised. I was like, I heard such horrible things about how violent this game was and how gruesome it was and how terrible, and that, like, I didn't think that story was great, and I think the twist is gross, and I think that the points that it's making at the end don't make a lot of sense, right? But, whatever. And then I thought about what the experience of actually playing the game would have been like. Because obviously I didn't watch somebody, like, literally play through the game for the first time and figure it out. I just watched someone show you how to get all the endings.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously there's a lot of stuff that I didn't see and a lot of the kind of, like, fooling around that I didn't see. But I also only got to watch Willem Dafoe murder the wife, like, once. That's not true. But, like, he did it off screen a few times. But I only had to, like, literally watch him, like, kick her to death once. So I didn't have the, like, visceral, this is horrible reaction that I felt like a lot of the reviews had. And so this does feel like it's rare that I encounter a game that not only do I think that I would personally enjoy more as a Let's Play than as actually playing it, but it does feel like this is a game that already wants to be a movie. And even though the adventure game element of it is in many ways probably the best part, right? Or the most successful part in some ways anyway. It does feel like this is maybe a game that is just actually universally better to watch someone play than to experience playing.
Yeah, I see that.
It's a big proclamation from me, but I don't usually feel that way. I can usually identify, like, okay, I'm not into this kind of game, but I'll enjoy watching it, but that doesn't mean that other people wouldn't like playing it better. This one I watched and I really came away with, like, who would enjoy playing this more than watching someone play it?
Even watching someone play it, if you're just watching someone play it for, like, the first time, there are a couple of, like, puzzle solutions that are, like, annoyingly obtuse. Like, there's one, like, you're proving that your wife couldn't have killed her father, right? Like, near the end of one of the first bits of it. And there's, like, a photo on the fridge that's the proof that she was somewhere else the night that her father was murdered. So I watched someone who had picked up that photo with the intention of showing it to the cop.
Oh, but the cop won't look. Yeah.
But the cop won't look. The wife has to go to the fridge and get it. And if the photo's not there, then you fail that loop and die and have to do it again. Which is, like, that's, like, a deeply... That felt deeply frustrating to watch. as well.
Yeah, that did get included in my all endings loop, which must have been a sort of deliberate commentary from the person making the video of like, this is kind of dumb.
Or specifically, like, if it's like a walkthrough type thing too, it's like, don't do this.
Yeah. But overall, look, again, it's not to say that games, I'm coming across today as like, games can't be made about things that are dark and serious, right? That's not what I'm saying, but I don't think that 12 minutes is really interested in more than, well, that's not true. I don't think it succeeds in making it clear that the point of the twist is more than just a twist.
My main issue with 12 minutes actually is from a design perspective, because of the way the puzzles work. To find out more information, like, the solution is always hurting your wife.
Well, or hurting the cop, but yeah.
Yeah, or hurting, but even in the ones where you hurt the cop, you have to drug your wife, like,
right,
4 times. You have to put your wife to sleep. And it's like, well, that's a little, like, just sort of mechanically get into the motions of, like, this is how I drugged my wife and make it work. Or here's how I watch my wife get murdered several times, or something to that effect. And it's just, like, a little bit... I don't feel like it has a point to that, or at least doesn't enumerate it well, right? It's just, rather than it being like... You could make an argument that is trying to say something about how this guy sees his wife, right?
But it's not.
As sort of like a tool or a symbol or a thing that he has. But I do not think the game makes that clear enough to really be like, oh yeah, this is what the game is trying to say. There's not a thread there to me. And so it just becomes like a mechanical thing where the solution is always like hurting your wife.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I hadn't thought about it in that exact... I mean, I'd noticed that you drug your wife over and over and over and like that sort of thing, but I hadn't really thought about how the time loop doesn't become much more than a game element, if that makes sense. Like, there is one moment that sort of stuck out to me a little bit more was, maybe it's not the first time she's dead, but one of the first times that the cop kills her. No, it must be the first time. The husband, James, whatever, does sort of freak out, and he's like, let this be a loop, let this be a loop. And it's like the only time that one of the few times where it wasn't just like the loop was sort of something you had to convince someone you were in, or that it was just a tool for you to be able to learn more information, right? There weren't that many points where being in a loop felt like anything your character was even noticing anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Which maybe makes a little bit of sense when you think about the sort of potential meta-narrative of the game, but is a little weird going through it. Like, there are no loops where he just sort of sits there and processes.
Yeah, there's also things like you can just kill your wife.
Yeah, I didn't see that ever happen.
You can also kill yourself, to be fair.
Yeah.
Which is sort of like a harder reset than you can just walk out the apartment if you really need to reset it. But it's like, it's not like, he doesn't really think about it like, oh, maybe this will break the loop if I kill my wife. You can just do it. You can just be like, I'm gonna stab my wife now.
Yeah. And particularly in a game that makes a point of, and the character makes a point of being frustrated with at various points, that you don't know what you need to do to get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
It does feel like, oh, maybe you should be a little bit freaked by killing your wife for the first time, or killing yourself for the first time, right?
I mean, it gets freaked, but also it's just like, there's not like a lead up to it, really. Yeah. It's just like, I've decided I'm going to kill my wife and then get upset about it.
Yeah.
It just feels a little unnecessary. Like, it's like trying to prove a point that, like, you can do anything, you know, like you can try lots of stuff, but it applies that to, like, being able to stab your wife and not to, like, more creative solutions. Like, there's someone I saw who was like, I'll spill water in front of the door so that when the cop comes in, he'll slip.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's something you can actually do, even though, like, filling a glass of water is something you can do.
Seems like maybe you should be able to spill water near the malfunctioning light switch and kill him. The malfunctioning light switch does make me think that maybe they know that there's a little bit of humor in this game.
Yeah.
Because it's like, that is sort of like painfully convenient that the way to knock out the cop is you've got this broken light switch where he electrocutes himself.
Anyway, should we talk a little bit about the twist and the theories, I guess, around what the game means?
Yeah. So I'll say, while the repeated violence against your wife was bad, I felt the game was a semi-successful... I mean, obviously I knew the twist was coming, but I felt the game was a semi-successful detective mystery, slight horror story. Like, up to the point, like, with the first twist of, like, she really has killed her father. It's because this whole, like, sort of abusive backstory, right? Like, up to that point. And it sort of felt like there might have been there should have been a different way to take the game with that story than the way that it did go.
Yeah. And
I think that that's part of, I mean, I have the reaction to it because, of course, it's like, oh, come on, like, why did it have to be about this? But I particularly have that reaction because it's like, well, wait, really, why did it have to be about this? It seems like there are other directions this game could have gone that didn't have to be this way that still would have worked. Anyway, Emma, reveal the twist. Great.
Oh, I have to do it. Okay. So you find out, after finding out that your wife did not, in fact, kill her father, it's like she talks
thought
about
she
how
did, but he didn't really die. Yeah.
Well, she shot him, but he did not die on that night, and then he died on a different night. And she talks about, Daisy talks about, like, her dad had an affair with the nanny and had another child who she just knew as Monster. I think that's what the dad and her mom called them. And so they decide, and when her dad died, the policeman says, the fake policeman says, oh, he was saying Monster over and over again. So they're like, it must have been her half-brother. And he also mentions that the nanny who had this monster's name started with a D and was something flowery. Mm-hmm. And you're still in the time loop after this. And if you go through the motions of drugging your wife and shooting the cop again, you can show him the baby clothes with the name Dahlia on it, which, if you remember, is your dead mother's name. Is James's dead mother's name. And he's like, oh yeah, that's the name of the nanny. And that's when James has the realization that he and Daisy are half siblings. And they're married and having a child. And also he murdered their dad, apparently.
Yeah. And this is where the game starts to fall apart, I think.
Yeah.
Particularly the fact that he actually murdered the dad and he somehow doesn't remember that.
Well, I think this is where I find it really hard to read this as, like, a literal thing that is happening.
Right. And right. I don't think it is.
I'm more akin to the idea that is something happening inside of James's head in some capacity. Mainly because they show the scene where James murders the dad, who is also Willem Dafoe.
Yeah.
For one thing. Like, not just the voice actor, but he shows up in scenes and very clearly looks like the cop character. And in this scene that supposedly happened 10 years ago, he says that Daisy is pregnant. Which it was not true 10 years ago,
Right.
for one thing. And two, like, there wouldn't have been any way for him to find out about it, right? Because your character just found out. She hadn't told anybody else, you know? If this was somehow, like, some sort of weird recreation. So it's, like, that fact alone, then I'm like, well, this isn't a literal thing. It can't be, because this particular scene does not make any sense like that.
I think what's tricky for me is that from this point forward, it becomes hard to track what is a genuine plot hole and what is some kind of unreliable narrator, and like why, right? Like,
Yes.
Why are we introducing things in this that don't make sense without really even calling attention to the fact that they don't make sense? There are, like, as you go through the loops, there are things about your apartment that change.
Yes.
Right? The paintings change, the flowers change. There are other suggestions that something weird is going on here. That it's not, like, not actually a literal time loop, that it's something else. But it becomes difficult to track. And, like there's a voice line, apparently, or there was, where it's like, you met on New Year's Eve, that they had to patch out because, like, you couldn't have met on New Year's Eve because you were killing your dad.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there's just all of these, like, weird little plot holes that's like, I guess you can hand wave them away as this is all in your mind palace anyway. But, like, why? What's the point of that?
Yeah. I mean, the fact that they patched out that contradictory line too also makes me be like, is this a dream? Why do they care that much about consistency? If the intended reading is that it's in this guy's head anyway, you know?
I mean, that one, I'll say, becomes so confused, like, it does sort of contradict itself even within the dream. Without, like, I could feel like, okay, we can accept plot holes that contradict themselves if you think too hard about it. But I could understand being like, okay, if the plot hole is so blatant that you hear, like, wait a minute, then that's probably bad.
But I mean, I could see it as something like she says that early on in the thing when he does not remember killing their dad.
Right.
So if this whole thing is meant to be like a defensive mechanism or a way to figure out an escape out of this situation, I could see it being like, initially the thing is like, well, he can't have killed his dad, but then it changes so that it can have, as he remembers that he did it, right? That makes sense to me if it's a dream.
And that would be interesting. And I think having a game that wanted to create more of those plot holes on purpose and then change them would be a more interesting game than this. I think this game, this is what I mean when I say I think it is more concerned with the twist than what it's about. Or at the very least, it's not good enough at what it's doing to appear to be anything more concerned about the twist than what it's about. I don't think that the team here was intentionally like, what's the most shocking thing that could happen here? They're half siblings, right? Because I get it. So the way it goes on from there, right, is even once you find out you're half siblings, the time loop continues. That's not the end, right? Even once you remember that you're the one who killed the dad, seemingly because you went to ask his permission to date your half sister. Mm-hmm. Just like, what? Who would ever do that?
I don't know. It's not clear to me if he knew before going to see her dad.
I guess that's right. I guess that's maybe that. But see, like, I want to see that scene. I wanted to see the scene where he shows up and is like, Dad. Anyway. But eventually, so it seems like this clock that the cop has been looking for, in addition to, or the fake cop has been looking for, in addition to being worth a lot of money, is also sort of, how you interact with the time loop in the game. So by setting it to that 12 minutes before the end marker, you get kicked into the study with your dad cop.
Dad cop. Willem Dafoe.
You get kicked into a study with Willem Dafoe.
Says, why'd you spill your beans? Basically.
And then you get some kind of like final ending type choices. where you can either decide whether you want to stay in the loop forever and just never tell her, or if you want to leave the relationship, in which case you go to an empty apartment at the end, or if you just want to forget.
Yeah. So there seem to be
3
endings that are sort of in sequence, or at least it made sense to me in the way this Bob Vid's video laid it out. Is there's the one where you choose to leave without telling her anything, right? In which case you end up in an empty apartment, but can still find the pocket watch and set it back to re-enter the loop. You can choose then to forget everything through hypnotism, basically, which erases like your save data, but also like restarts you right at the start of the game. And then you can do one where you just sort of watch. You don't choose, and like the dad cop gives you like a thing about like you have to just deal with it, man. In which case it puts you back in the menu without the option to continue the game.
Well, then there's the one where you click on the secret clock.
Yeah, that's that one.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But he says you gotta wake up.
Yeah.
And so all of these endings sort of suggest that what's happening isn't actually happening at all. And it's just something that your character, like some kind of hallucination or whatever, like fantasy that your character is engaging in to avoid facing the reality that this relationship can't work.
Yeah.
Which it just feels like it could have been something else.
Yep.
Just feels like you could have told that story without it being like they're half siblings.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's also just like, oh man, this poor troubled man. He's fantasizing about stabbing his wife.
Yeah. We need to move to the mashup here, but like it just seems like there's something here that there's an interesting gameplay loop, even if it can be overly frustrating and dictatorial about how you advance at times. But there's an interesting gameplay loop. There's probably, like, not to be like, I wonder how American Mcgee would have told this story. But, like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm sort of thinking, like, the Alice story is sort of coherent in the crazy world, or the weirdo, bizarro world that it creates for itself, and how that interacts with Alice's trauma. And this, it's like, what the heck is wrong with this guy? That the way he's processing this is that, like, a cop that looks like his dad comes in and murders his wife over and over again.
Yeah. Well, so much for 12 minutes being a fourth of this podcast. Let's do the mashup.
If I can do the mashup in the next 12 minutes, that'd be good. Okay, so it's gotta take place in somebody's mind palace.
Yeah.
Somebody's
absolutely.
dark fantasy. Yeah. Sparked by some kind of traumatic event.
Some sort of familial trauma, too.
Yes. Familial trauma. Agreed. Gameplay-wise, so time loop is so all-consuming that it's like if there's a time loop in one of the games, it feels like there has to be a time loop, but
yeah,
that is tough. Both of them pretty, like, sort of linear, if that makes sense. Or they like, restrict the choices available to you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So we definitely needs to be something that's pretty contained in terms of how you can interact with the world. I really do like a Great Gatsby time loop. You're like Nick, and you're like, can I find a way to save these people?
We can just leave it at that if you want. It's been so long since I read The Great Gatsby. I only remember, like, the basic points, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, I know. It's too big a story to be a time loop game, to be clear, but it's like, is there a story where they can all end up happily?
And the answer is no.
Yeah.
I feel like it's probably the moral of The Great Gatsby, right?
Yeah. Again, the ships, boats beating against the tide, borne ceaselessly back into the past.
It is very time loopy.
Begging for a time loop. Begging for it. Can you imagine him saying that at the end? The power of that closing the game?
Yeah.
This is not a mashup, though. This is just I'm just pitching this game idea to you. Great Gatsby time loop.
Uh-huh. Got it.
The Great Loop.
Okay, so...
Emma Paquette's Gatsby.
Okay. Hansel and Gretel.
Okay.
Brother, sister.
No!
Fairy tale.
Okay. Okay. Where's this going? I'm scared.
That's all I've got. I got Hansel and Gretel. I've decided that's the fairy tale we're working with, because I think it works.
I don't want to
really
do
well.
a fairy tale.
That seems like such a core, like that's Alice, right? Like the thing is, it is taking a fairy tale and sort of Hansel and Gretel's already effed up though, so
Yeah.
And that's got 3 characters, right? You've got Daisy Gretel, James Hansel, and Willem Dafoe is the Candy Witch.
I think we can get them to reprise their roles.
I think he's made for that role. So you're one of the siblings, and you get sort of separated in this, like, really labyrinthine Candy Witch house. And you have to, like, fight your way to get to your other sibling and escape. But there's, like, lots of different routes you can take, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are, like, wrong, but you might find out more information or something to help you, like, figure out where you have to go.
I like the time loop plus third-person linear action adventure becomes, like, a roguelike kind of almost vibe. Yeah.
And, like, then it turns out that, like, your sibling is, like, a figment of your imagination. Like, the Candy Witch is, like, some sort of domineering, abusive parental figure, and you've invented, like, a person that you need to be the protector of to sort of deal with it.
Interesting. I feel like we have to do some, like, referencing of Aiko.
Yeah, that's fair.
But, like, I think that's fine. I think that's something we can reference on purpose with this game successfully, which is good. I like that.
And then at the end, you figure you were able to escape somehow. I don't know how it ended.
Yeah, I don't know if
happy
it ends
ending.
happy or ends
We're taking
sad.
the happy ending from Alice instead of whatever
Okay,
12
fair
minutes is.
Do you think we could do the same story but with the Parent Trap? Just a thought.
I don't know how I feel about the Parent Trap turning into, like, a roguelike, but
There wasn't another twin all along.
I guess so.
Your mom just abandoned you.
I guess you could do that.
Just a thought. No, interesting. I'm not sure if people will be, like, excited about a Hansel and Gretel game. That's all. Maybe if James McAvoy is doing it.
There's, like, that Dark Souls Pinocchio coming out that everybody's obsessed with, so I don't know. I think they'll take anything.
I feel like you could do something with, like, Rumpelstiltskin, too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Any of the fairy tales that are about, like, selling your firstborn probably have lovely psychological mind palace versions.
Yeah. I did just go with Hansel and Gretel for the siblings thing, but I cut the incest. So it's okay.
For the best. I think it's good. I think it's solid. I'm not sure it's as good as Emma Paquette's Gatsby, but
Emma Paquette's vaguely remembered Gatsby from 10th grade English. with a time loop.
Yeah, Emma, go ahead and tell me what that story, just as a closer, what would the story be, as you recall? Great Gatsby.
So there's the guy, what's his name? James?
Go on.
I've been saying James a lot. No, Ned. Ned, right? It's Ned? And he moves into, like, Gatsby's, like, garden house, right? And Gatsby, like, throws all these parties, because he wants, like, his old love, like, Daisy to come, like, re-fall in love with him or whatever. And there's, like, a big eye that's looking down at them all. I remember that.
On the cover, but not in... Yep, okay.
And then, like, does Gatsby, like, drown in the swimming pool? Am I right?
Somebody dies in a car crash and somebody drowns. I think he does drown and she...
Okay. His name's Ned? Is his name Ned?
No.
What's the POV's character's name again?
It's Nick.
Nick. It was almost there.
And what color is the light that represents...
It's green. It's green.
The American dream.
It's green. This is money, right?
Yeah.
I remember writing about the eye a lot. That's about, like, the only thing I remember about The Great Gatsby.
The eye would be pretty good for a game, just saying.
All right. Give us the closer, Madeline.
Hey, folks, thanks for listening to another episode of Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I hope you stuck around for that great summary of The Great Gatsby. But if you enjoyed the show, you should check us out on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games that are in the hat, and read our blog, featuring long-running series, Clickbait Boyfriend, and Split Screen. But most importantly, if you like the show, why don't you subscribe so you never miss an episode on Sundays at noon? We are on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Casts, anywhere you can find podcasts, wherever you found the podcast today, you can find Talk This. Next week is the 6-week recap, right?
Yep, 6-week recap.
Woo! Followed
Very exciting.
by what?
We're going to be talking about Twisted Metal for our old game.
Exciting.
And Elden Ring for our new game.
Okay, so you have to buy it.
I have to buy it?
So Clickbait Boyfriend can play it while he's there.
Oh, I see.
I think we'll have recorded it before he's there, though.
Yeah.
Oh, am I gonna have to get Elden Ring on my
You need
PlayStation?
to fix your PS4 first.
My PS4 that's in a death spiral? Well, listen, look forward to my review of Elden Ring next time. It's like, it's really laggy.
I think you're excused until you figure out your console situation.
I'm excused until Emma buys me a PlayStation 5.
Oh my gosh.
Well, listeners, thanks for being here today. I'll do the sign-off.
Okay.
Listeners, this week, hello and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast.